If you would, take a songbook and turn to 464. 464. Thank you for coming out to celebrate the life of our brother Tom. The two songs that we'll be singing today as a congregation are two of his favorites. And Darlene said, as Tom would say, let's get this show on the road. God sent his Son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives, but greater still, the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And then one day I'll cross the river, I'll find life's final war with pain, and then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory, and I'll know he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Dr. Thomas Allen Ledbetter, 82, of Hendersonville, North Carolina, passed away Friday, December 17th, 2021, at his home. Born in Sylva, North Carolina, he was the son of the late Jack J. Ledbetter and Bernita Sutton Ledbetter. Dr. Ledbetter began his education as a student in Jackson County Public Schools. After graduating from high school, he received his bachelor's from Lipscomb University, his master's from Western Carolina University, and his education doctorate from the University of Tennessee, specializing in school planning. Dr. Ledbetter worked for an architectural firm in Nashville, planning and designing efficient, effective school buildings. Later, while working with the Church of Christ in Andrews, North Carolina, Dr. Ledbetter began his career in education as an interim teacher. He spent nearly 40 years in education, including 20 as a principal of East Henderson High School, before becoming Assistant Superintendent of Auxiliary Services for Henderson County Public Schools, retiring in 1998. Dr. Ledbetter was a member and past president of the Western Carolina University chapter of Phi Delta Kappa, a member and past president of the Hendersonville Kiwanis Club, and a member of the Southeast Region Council of Educational Facility Planners International. One special honor he received in 2010 was his induction into the Henderson County Education Foundation Hall of Fame. Dr. Ledbetter, affectionately known as Doc by many, was honored that night as one who weighed the individual cases and people's situations before making his decisions about his students because he believed kids are not all alike. He was a strong believer in academics and school sports, understanding that success breeds success. Dr. Ledbetter is survived by his wife of 62 years, Connie Kimbrough Ledbetter, his daughter, Megan Ledbetter Schaefer, and son-in-law, David P. Schaefer. Grandson, AJ. The three sisters, Jackie Sue Ledbetter, Barbara Ann Bembry, both of Silva, and Linda Fry of Hendersonville. Paul was my best buddy, and we did anything and everything together, from watching Tennessee football and really hoping that they would win, to playing in the front yard, or my favorite part was when we broke out the golf clubs. And some of my most fun, most memorable moments of my childhood was from Nana and Pa's front yard. And I was real little and I would just whack it around the front yard, and then I got bigger and I could hit it a little farther, so I took it to the whole neighborhood. And Paul would sit in the back just watching, and he'd go, AJ, maybe you shouldn't swing so hard. You may hit a house or like a car or like, something that might break. And I'd say, no, Pa, I'm too good to hit a house or a car. So I kept going. But, we'd go out and about a good bit, and everywhere we went, Pa knew somebody or somebody knew Pa. And at a young age, I was like, how does this guy know so many people? And why do they all call him Doc? I knew him as Pa. But as I got older, I figured out that Pa understood everyone, and he wanted to understand everyone. He wanted to get to know people for who they were so he could make a connection. And I also figured out that he's probably one of the most selfless men that I'll ever know. He did anything for anybody, whether it was just to put a smile on their face or make them laugh or give them something they needed. But, that's something that I'll always remember and I'll always try to mimic. And, he always said it never hurts to be kind. And that's something that I'll also try to live by, and I think we all can. So thank you, Pa, and we all love you.
I heard Tom say in a setting like this once, if all the long-winded speakers were laid out in a line head to foot, that'd probably be a good thing. He's a funny man, quick-witted man. Tom was a storyteller, and I've been asked to tell some stories about Tom. And I'll start with one that's kind of definitional to his character. It's a hard story. When his mother was 49 years old, Tom's father passed away suddenly of a heart attack. That was in early November. And his mom came to Tom and said, "You've got to get me into Western Carolina so I can finish my degree." So it's beginning in November and her husband dies. And by the end of November, she's already sitting in classes, studying education so that she can get back to teaching and support herself, take care of herself. And that was who she was, and she poured that into Tom, so that hard times could come at Tom, but they couldn't get into Tom. Tom's favorite verse in Scripture was Romans 8:28, which says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His good purpose." His mother had a saying. She would say, "Well, that was today. Now let's get on to tomorrow." And that just settled into Tom, and it defined who he was. Because he believed that God was good and God was going to take care of things, and because he had seen such strength to move through such adversity, Tom was unflappable. He could go through anything, knowing whatever came, well, that was today. Now let's get on to tomorrow. As AJ mentioned, Tom spent a lot of his life in education, working with kids. And I've got some stories about kids. I don't know if it's some of you, but if I tell your story, I'm sorry. Because a lot of them are kind of hard. One of the very first stories I ever heard Tom tell was a story about a boy who had been cutting up in class and got himself into trouble and was sent down to the office. The vice principal was upset with him because of what he had done and was really laying into him. And Tom walks in and sees the boy getting chewed out and looks at the boy, and he does what the vice principal hadn't done. He sees the boy, and he really sees him. And he says to the vice principal, okay, now, that's enough. You come with me. And he takes him into his office. He says, all right, this isn't you. What's going on? He said the boy just broke down and said, this morning before I came to school, my daddy told my mama that he's never coming back. He went out and he got in his truck and he drove off. And I don't know what we're going to do. And Tom just sat there and loved that boy. Like I said, that's one of the first stories he ever told me when I was coming here to do ministry. The church had been through some rough times. And often when Tom would tell you a story, he wasn't telling you that story. He was telling you that story because you needed to know a truth that was in that story. And he wouldn't explain the truth. He just counted on you to get it. But what he was telling me and Ashley was, see people. Look at people. See them. Because that's what he did. One time a great big guy was in his office, had done something really, really dumb. And Tom said to him, I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed. And this great big old boy just wilted and said, oh, Doc, I wouldn't disappoint you for the world. And then that boy opens up and starts talking about what's going on in his life, because he could do that with Tom. Tom one time gave a teenage kid who was having a rough time, he gave him $20 so he could go buy a battery for a car. That was not this year. A couple years later, there's a knock at the door. And Tom opens the door, and there's that kid now grown up. And he says, I owe you $20. Tom's like, what? I never expect to see that money again. What do you do? He said, no, you don't understand. That made a difference in my life. I've got my life straightened out, and I want to pay you back. I want to give you $20. What kind of person inspires that kind of behavior? It's a person that sees people. There was once a girl walking down the hallway. This was an introverted girl, kind of socially awkward, didn't have maybe the best support network at home. But it was her senior year, and it was just a few weeks before graduation, and Tom saw her doing her shuffling, interned walk. And he walked up to her, and he said, congratulations, you're going to graduate soon. You made it. I'm proud of you. The mother of that girl came back to him sometime later and said that what she said when she got home was, well, nobody else is proud of me, but Doc's proud of me. There was a girl who would always get into trouble. She spent a ton of time in Doc's office, right? Well, one morning he is down in a teacher's classroom. He is observing the teacher, which is what principals do. He's watching, making sure the teaching's going okay. And in walks this girl. And the teacher says, why are you late? And she says, well, yeah, I was down in Doc's office. He called me in. He had to talk to me. Doc's sitting in the back row of the class. And Tom knew their names. Tom knew all their names. They mattered to him. They all mattered to him. And he remembered them, and they remembered him. Like AJ mentioned, where could Doc go that he wasn't running into someone who was saying, Doc? One time, Connie was talking about it. He was going into some office probably to get his license renewed or something, and they're standing in line, this long line, and someone who was a kid, not a kid anymore, walks up and says, Doc, what are you doing here? And then turns to Connie and points at him and says, that man's the reason I made it. He's the reason I made it through school. And he said, Doc, come with me. You don't have to stand in line. Let's go. Because he knew them. And because he knew them and they knew he cared about them, he could do his job when it got hard. Discipline was received because they expected and knew that he was being fair. He said to one of his family members one time, I always felt that if you were fair, they could accept discipline a lot better. Even those big old boys, if they thought you were being fair, if you talked to them and explained what you were going to do, they would accept what you had to do, whatever it was. And he could catch kids when they were getting into trouble all the time. And they'd say to him, how do you know? How do you find us? And he said, what do you think we did? And when the students would come to TP his house, he did not cooperate with that. One year they drove through his lawn, so the next year he put a spike, buried it down in the lawn to rip out their transmission if they tried that again. He hid behind a bush one year, and as they drove by, a kid was kind of leaning out the window. He grabbed hold of the kid, almost pulled him out of the window. One year, it's the middle of the night, and they didn't have air conditioning, so all the windows are open, and they're all being real quiet, not really being quiet at all. They're running around in the yard. Woke Connie up, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And zoom, they're all off, right? And so here goes Tom and Megan. They jump in the car, and the chase is on, And just a couple of blocks from his house, there's a car wash. And Megan said that he was just driving round and around and around. They're hiding in the car wash. They think they're hidden. And he's just having the time of his life driving around that car wash. There's a name for all this. There's something we call all this. We call this love. That's what Tom did with his life. He lived his life to love these kids. Yeah. Not every principal is like this. I don't know if you went to a high school with a principal like this. I'll tell you, I went to Jerry Albright was a fine man. But he didn't know me. I didn't matter to him. I mattered in as much as he did his job. He did a fine job. But I didn't have Tom Ledbetter. I don't know if you did or not, but if you did, you were blessed. There's a reason he did this stuff. It's because he was a Christian. Christians do their jobs like this because they do their jobs in the service of God. Tom was a Christian. Tom loved his kids. Got a couple of faculty stories. I've only got a couple of these, and I got to keep them anonymous. Connie said, well, if you mention anyone's name, then the others are going to be like, well, why didn't I? So. But what he would say is, I have got the absolute best faculty. And apparently they kind of thought the same of him because there were a lot of years where there was no turnover. Where the faculty this year, same faculty next year, same faculty. Why? Because he's a good principal. And they loved working for him. See, he thought of them as the most important part of the school. This is a guy who built school buildings for a living. He knew facilities. He's like, no, it's the faculty. They're what matters. He would have his faculty meetings at 8 o'clock because classes started at 8:30, and that way there was a terminus. See, if you have your faculty meeting at 3 in the afternoon, then you're going to still be in faculty meeting, when the Vols are playing, and that's, Saturday. So, but if it was important, it would come up. And if it was real important and it didn't get brought up, it would get dealt with. But he was wise. But really, everyone was important to Tom. Faculty down to custodial staff. The custodial staff was on the most important thing list. There was a member of the custodial staff who couldn't do his taxes. Tom did his taxes every year because he could. There was a guy, on the custodial staff they were having kind of a hard time. Tom had a car he was looking to get rid of, and he was thinking he was going to sell it. And he heard about what this guy was going through, and he walked up to him and he said, hey, could you use a car? And the guy said, Lord, yes. All right, you got a car. Years later, that made such a huge difference. To that man, he would tell Connie, you remember that time? I do. When Tom gave me a car. There was a particular teacher who almost never sent students to Tom. And he said, if she ever sent a kid to me, I might as well crucify him because she's already done everything that can be done for that person. Tom's prep to be in education, as was mentioned, he's doc. He was a doctor of educational administration with an emphasis in school planning. He planned and built educational environments. That's what he trained to do. He built schools. So he planned and built rugby right down the road here. Did you know that? Well, he didn't build it. He didn't actually lay the bricks, but it wouldn't be built if it weren't for Tom. And Flat Rock Middle as well. You know, he that's what he did, and he built schools in Ohio, and he built schools in St. Louis, and he wrote his doctorate on his lap in an airplane, traveling all over the place to help these places have good schools. When Megan came along, though, he said, I didn't go to school to stay on the road all the time, so he looked to get a job at home. He went to Glen Marlowe, the one the school's named for. He was the superintendent of schools, and he said, I know there's a principal office open, and I'd like to have it. And he said, well, I can't give you that one. I've already promised, but I'll give you East. And so off he goes to East High. He got the job so that he could be at home with his family, and that was a priority, but he stayed in that job, and he had offers. He could have gone other places. He stayed in that job because he loved the relationships he had. He loved the relationships with the people, and he loved the relationships with the faculty, and he loved you. And he stayed to be there. Glenn Marlowe gave him some advice, said, retire as soon as you can. I've stayed too long. And Tom took that advice and retired as quickly as he can. He did some consulting in West Virginia and with school planning. But then he went to work for Jimmy Maccabee at an orchard here. And Connie said that he loved that job more than any job he ever did, because he got to see the whole community come through, and he'd get to see all these people that he loved. He got to cut up with them and have fun, putting apples in bags, rolling them down the chute to AJ so that AJ could put the apples in the bags, and he loved that job. What was he like in his family? Well, Connie says that Tom was more the gentle, kind of person. She said, I was rigid and organized and constantly saying, we need to get this done and we need to do that. And Tom would just roll with the punches. He was the one who would look at the scraped knees and the boo-boos. Connie said, we were kind of the opposite of other expectations for our generation. I was the one who was, let's get it done. And he was the one who's the old softy. Megan said that if I got into it with Mom, I might get a spanking. Dad would just sit me down, and he'd just be disappointed, and that was way worse than a spanking. She said, I was a daddy's girl. One time, Megan was getting in trouble with Mom, and she was saying, Megan, you need to, and she's about 4, and she says, Mama, you just go your way, and Daddy and I will go mine. Megan had a best friend named Faith, and when it would snow, Tom would pile them into the car. There'd be 6 inches of snow on the ground, and he would drive down to Saluda from up here. And it's so they could go sledding. And it was partly so they could go sledding, and it was partly so he could drive in the snow. The great joy of their family was being Vols fans. He got his doctorate at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and so they're Vols fans. Every Saturday, if there was a home game, they're going to be in the stadium. And they said that his blood might have been orange instead of red. Said that he would go and watch the game. He'd get upset, and he'd shout, and he'd wave his hands, and he'd officiate from the stands, and he's having such a great time. He said that he had a hat that played Rocky Top. So he'd come in, sit down, and push the little button. You have to sit through Rocky Top. When they'd go to the games, he'd let everybody leave the stadium, and then, Megan and her friend, they'd go out and they'd collect all the Tennessee Vols cups, all the souvenir cups that got left behind. They'd wait until the stadium was empty, and they'd collect all those cups. They'd come home with a stack taller than they are. And then leaving the stadium traffic would be bumper to bumper and going like 100 miles an hour, and the cops would just be sitting there watching because they wanted all those people out of their town. And Tom would be driving bumper to bumper traffic, 100 miles, and having the time of his life. He was totally in his element. This is something I never would have guessed about Tom Ledbetter, but that man loved to drive a fast car. He really loved fast cars. Once they were on their way from Nashville to Knoxville, And a state trooper was going with the team bus that was going to Knoxville to play, and he just slid in behind that team bus. They were going like 110 miles an hour. He drove all the way from Nashville to Knoxville like he was part of a caravan. And, he's driving 100 miles an hour. Loved the drive. I said it sounds like Tom missed a career as a race car driver or maybe a bootlegger. And Connie said, "Oh, no joke. He went to Western with a boy who spent time in the penitentiary for hauling liquor, and he loved to ride with that guy because that guy knew how to drive." Little bit of trivia here. Tom may not have been the first, but he probably was the first person to drive on the stretch of I-40 that goes from Knoxville up to Asheville through the windy patch through the mountains. He had to get over here from Knoxville, and he said, "I'm not going over the mountain. I'm going on that new road." Connie said, "Tom, that road's not open." He said, "It's paved." And so off they go. And there's not a light on the road, not a light in the tunnels. There's no lines on the road. There's no guardrails on the road. And here he is driving up. There's construction equipment, and that's it. And he is having the time of his life, being the first person to drive on I-40. If you knew Tom at all, you knew that he was absolutely dedicated to church. Christianity was at the center of who he was. It wasn't part of his identity. That was his identity. He was Christian all the way through. The man knew his Bible better than anyone I think I've ever met. And he loved God so deeply. So deeply. And he cared about church. He was dedicated to the church's well-being, and that comes from his earliest childhood. He met Connie at church when she was 12 and he was 14. Interesting little side story, not related to church. They got married when they were in college at Lipscomb. They went off and eloped. Never did have a wedding ceremony. They went off and eloped, and then they went back to their separate dorms. Because that's not strange at all. But when they were young, the church didn't have the best reputation. In their high school, the church where they went was treated like they were, irrational, exuberant snake handlers or something, which if you know the churches of Christ, that's as far from an accurate description of us as can be. We are a very reasonable, rational group of people. And we are reasoning to the core. Well, Tom was very, very firm in his beliefs because he wanted to be known for what we actually are. And also, he wanted us to be known for what we're not, that we're not that. And that was true from his earliest days. He wanted the church to have the reputation it deserved. And he worked to be a man of God in all these ways where he's out blessing these kids because he knew he carried the reputation of the church with him everywhere he went. And he wanted it to be well. He wanted it to be good. Tom loved the congregation, the building in which you're sitting right now. He loved this place. And he loved it. He worked hard to get this building done. Like really hard. His knowledge of architecture knew that he knew how to find somebody who could help get this place to be excellent, even if he had to drive to Atlanta to do it. And for many years, he and a man named Ken Hyder took turns preaching when the church was working on building this building, and they took no salary for their preaching so that the building fund could be put together and this place could be what it is. He was dedicated to church. And he was dedicated in a lot of ways that a lot of people didn't know about. He was on the board of an adoption agency called Agape. He was dedicated to the Southeastern Children's Home. He was the person in charge in this church of the mission in Thailand. A lot of people didn't know no one knew half of what he did. And he did a lot behind the scenes that no one will ever know about because he didn't want people to know about it. He just wanted to do what was good. He just wanted to help. He wanted to serve God. Toward the end of his life, Tom's health was failing. His kidney was going, and so he was retaining a lot of fluid. Last time I ever talked to Tom, it was right back there. I was so happy to see him in church. I said, "How are you doing, Tom?" He said, "I feel fine, really. I'm fine." He probably wasn't. He wasn't hurting, but his health was failing. In your program, you'll see 2 Corinthians 4, starting in verse 16. It says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Well, that was Tom to his core. That was Tom his whole life, but that was especially in the last part of his life. That was Tom to his core. His focuses were not on what he could see, but what he couldn't. On the knowledge and the truth and the love of God. And he was inwardly renewed day by day, even as his body was slowing down. Connie wanted this story included. I suspect the other people in the story don't. In August of 2009, Tom was given 12 more years of life. His kidney was failing, and he was very likely to die at the age of 70. And two ladies in his church, without asking his opinion or permission, went and got tested to see if they could give him a kidney. Kathy went and got tested. Turns out she wasn't a good match. Asked her sister Karen. Karen went and got tested. She called Tom and she said, "I've been tested and they say it was a perfect match. Thought I was a family member. I'm ready to do this whenever you are." They did that on their own. Tom didn't know they were even doing it until they called. And that says an awful lot about all of them, doesn't it? You don't do that for someone unless they love you. You don't do that for someone unless you love them. You don't do that for someone unless all of y'all love Christ. Tom lived to be 82, but he would have died at 70 if it weren't for the love of Karen. Tom really did believe that all things work out for good. He believed in God, and he knew that God would see that things worked out for good. He lived his life saying, that was today. Now let's move on to tomorrow. Tom has moved into the eternal tomorrow, and all things have worked out well for him. Well done, Tom. Well done, Tom Ledbetter. Whew. You fought the good fight. You finished the race. You've kept the faith. There's a crown that's been waiting for you that's now yours. Well done, Tom. May we all do as well.
I want to express my thanks to Aunt Connie for asking me to say a few words on behalf of his sisters and the sort of extended family. My Aunt Jackie Sue wanted me to tell you that Tom was her favorite brother. Nah, she didn't actually say that. But of course he was their favorite brother. And they had a good life with their parents and the gifts that were extended to them. My mom, wanted to convey her thankfulness. This is a lot harder than I thought it would be. My mom wanted me to convey her appreciation to Uncle Tom for the welcome that he extended to my dad when my dad first came to this area to do his master's at Western. And my dad didn't know anybody here, and Tom welcomed him into his circle of friends and made him feel a part and introduced him to a number of people, notably my mother. And without that hospitality and matchmaking of sorts, my sister and I and my parents' marriage of 55 plus years, doesn't really exist, does it? So, of course, all of us are deeply appreciative of Uncle Tom for that. So glad AJ has been a beneficiary of Uncle Tom's love of golf. I too was able to play a few rounds with Uncle Tom at the country club, and always appreciated those outings. I remember one time he was helping me work on my drive, and it was a little different from AJ's because he didn't trust me to just drive it off into the horizon. He put up a bed sheet on the hanging from the clothesline in the backyard and worked on hitting it, into the bed sheet. A lot safer for someone with not quite the accuracy of AJ. And the wonderful times, I have great memories of all of us going to the pool at the country club. Always just loved coming here and being here as a kid. One more story I wanted to share was, I remember one Christmas holiday, I think I was probably 12 or 13, and Tom and Connie and Megan had come to visit over to Silva. We lived in Silva. And we went over to my dad's elementary school to shoot basketball in the gym. And so Uncle Tom went with us, my dad, and I, and my sister. And my sister invited a bunch of her basketball friends to come with us. And I had a crush on a few of them at the time, and so I was super excited that we were going to be able to, be in the gym for a bit with these, my sister's friends. So we got to shooting around in the gym, and after about 5 minutes, I look around, and all of the group of girls are surrounding my Uncle Tom. And he's regaling them with stories, basketball stories, and just with a great personal style that at the moment I remember thinking, wow, my Uncle Tom, he's got some social chops. He knows he can really connect with young people. I never knew this. And so he was entertaining all these girls that I was trying to impress, and so it was a delight for me. I guess the most meaningful story I wanted to share with you comes from a few Christmases ago. My grandfather, Uncle Tom's father, worked on the railroad and had a pocket watch. And that pocket watch, means a lot. And Uncle Tom gave that to me. Yeah, I never knew my grandfather, of course, because he had died, when my mom was a senior in high school. And so that pocket watch really symbolic for me to connect with a past that I didn't know personally. But of course, was a great beneficiary of the love and the compassion and just commitment that Jack Ledbetter had and passed on to Tommy. And I hope by God's grace it's been passed on to our children. As well. So deeply appreciative of that pocket watch, and cherish it dearly. And that's who my Uncle Tom was too. And may he rest in peace in the arms of the Lord.
Turn in your songbooks to 711. 711. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4, and let's stand as we sing. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Before our Father's throne, we pour our ardent prayers, our fears, our hopes, seated, please.
When Connie called, she said, Jerry, don't bring your Bible and don't bring any notes. She said, just get up there and talk a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to do, but I did bring my Bible. And I did jot down some notes, I'm afraid. But you know, you can be in a place for a long time, like I had been here 21 years, and had never heard a lot of those stories. If I had, we would have had a lot more altar calls, I'll tell you that. But I did know a great deal about Tom. That when I first came here, I don't know what time of year, I think it was June of '84, Tom told me that he was there that Sunday that I began my work here, but he had not been here the day that I tried out to be a preacher here. And so when I did see him, he said, Jerry, I wasn't here when they hired you. And that's about all he said, and he walked away. And it wasn't until he helped me paint my office that I got to know him a little bit. And I expected that he would want to quiz me about all my positions, you know, and all of the experience maybe that I'd had or not had. And it was none of that. It was all just a fun time painting an office. And all through the years, I have appreciated Tom's spirit and all the things that have been said about him. I too drive fast, but not that fast, I tell you. But I did have one statement of the Lord that I wanted to share. In my mind, kind of sums up what Tom was all about. A good person, out of the good treasure of his heart, produces good. Now, isn't that pretty, just doesn't need a lot of explanation, does it? A good person, out of a good heart, produces good. And everything that we've talked about today has been good. He was not a perfect person, certainly. He would want to make that very clear. But he was a good person, thoroughly good person. Because he was raised in a family that loved God and served God, and he wanted that to be the way he lived, and it was the way he lived. He was a leader. He knew how to lead people, not by demanding, but by knowing and caring for them, as has already been described today. He was a fun person. And I remember early on before Megan and AJ, before he came, he was always talking about grandparents. He was saying jokes about how these grandparents are always showing pictures. They come to church and they're sitting back over there talking about their grandkids and all this. But you know, after AJ came, that never happened again. In fact, you could never pass him in the foyer without him stopping you to tell you all about AJ. And that he's going to be a pro one of these days. We're all going to be rich, that sort of thing. But he did enjoy, he could find humor in almost anything. And it was always that spirit that has been already described today, that he knew all things are going to work out for good. And when you know that and you can live that way, it certainly gives you a dimension of joy and happiness that most people never, ever really know. You stole my verse, 2 Timothy 6. What he has fought a good fight, finished the race, kept the faith. And there is, Paul said, laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give us in that day, and not to us only, but all who love his appearing, who are looking for Jesus to come. It's going to be the case that that crown of righteousness will be ours. I just want to then close with this quote from C.S. Lewis. Would you listen carefully to it? May have to read it twice. If we really think that home is elsewhere and that this life is a wandering to find home, why should we not look forward to the arrival Did you get that? Did you ever think about our life as a wandering for home? That is, that we live our lives looking for something and we never know if we're going to find it or have found it. We are certain that we didn't find it by the end of time, in our end of our lives. We know there was something missing if we didn't find home. And all of life is lived in pursuit of home. Tom found home. We grieve today, but we grieve for ourselves. We do not grieve for Tom. He's out maybe riding some fast vehicle today. We don't know where he is. But I suspect he'd stop to talk to some angels and maybe Abraham or Moses or somebody like that. That would attract his attention. And so we were talking just before we came in tonight today about what heaven will be like, what it will be like to be there. And I suggested that we all ought to use our imaginations because our imaginations could never imagine it. If you think about this universe and the God who built it, the God who brought it to being by His voice, by His word, by His thought, that kind of God does not compute with us. But He's the creator of the universe and the creator of our future. And if that is the case, if we believe that, we will live that, then we can see that home as a great arrival. The welcome home is going to come. Let's bow together as we pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for Tom Ledbetter, a great man, a giant among men. May we allow the impact of his life and legacy to bless us, to change us, and his memory is now a special part of who we are. We ask you to bless Connie, Megan, David, AJ, Jackie, Barb, and Linda, and all who were closest to them. Help them to stick together and hold on to the faith in God's promises that we know will never fail. He does all things well, and all things indeed do work together for good to those who love you and are called according to your purpose. Father, we thank you and praise you, and honor you, adore you, and love you because of the many blessings we have in life, not the least of which are the blessings that we have in men and women of faith, and men like Tom Ledbetter. Let us have his passion, his courage, his confidence as we go forth from this place today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Connie said this was always one of her favorite songs. It must have been cold there in my shadow to never have sunlight on your face. You were content to let me shine, that's your way. You always walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strength. A beautiful face without a name for so long. A beautiful smile to hide the pain. Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle, 'cause you are the wind beneath my wings. It might have appeared to go unnoticed, but I've got it all here in my heart. I want you to know I know the truth. Of course I know it. I would be nothing without you. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. I can fly higher than an eagle, 'cause you are the wind beneath my wings. Did I ever tell you you're my hero? You're everything, everything I wish I could be. Oh, and I could fly higher than an eagle, 'cause you are the wind beneath my wings. Thank you, thank you, thank God for you, the wind beneath my wings. Let's stand, family exit, and then we'll be dismissed.
I don't want to talk over the song. In behalf of the family, I want to thank you for being here today. Your presence blesses them, and as you remember them, if you want to send them a card to comfort them, that would mean a lot. I've been asked to let you know the family is going to head on down, and there's a meal prepared for them downstairs. Y'all are welcome to stay and reminisce about Tom for absolutely as long as you want to. And thank you all so much for coming. God bless you.